Hey guys, welcome to the Whole Estate Podcast. My name is Matt Hardiman, and I'm sitting here again with the author and founder of the Whole Estate, Alex Cottingham. In today's episode, we'll be discussing habits and how our habits contribute to the systems that affect our everyday lives. James Clear, a best-selling author of Atomic Habits, says that if unsuccessful and successful people share the same goals, then the goal cannot be what differentiates the winners from the losers. And he goes on to say, we do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And so in our last episode, we touched a little bit on how Alex has structured the book in the form of 7 habits. And Alex, could you just expand a little bit again and recap what actually is a habit and why is it the method that you use in the Whole Estate?
Absolutely. Well, first off, Matt, thanks for this. Thanks for part 2 of our conversation. I'm super looking forward to this. So when it comes to a habit, I feel like the word habit is a cultural buzzword right now. It's just all over every book, like the 7 habits of highly effective people or like high achieving habits or whatever it is.
True.
Where when you actually look at what a habit is, like the anatomy of a habit, all that is it's a regular tendency, behavior, practice that we perform every single day. We all have them, right? It's like washing our hands after we use the restroom or brushing our teeth after we eat something. It's something we can do subconsciously without consciously thinking about it, right? I don't have to think about washing my hands right, left, or like actually brush my teeth. It's almost like on autopilot. It's what I like to say, it's our go-to default mode that when we're not consciously thinking, our natural habit of sitting in a chair or brushing our teeth or whatever that habit may be, it's ingrained in the back of your head. That is a habit. So that's why when we talk about the 7 habits of health, when we talk about the difference between goals and systems, meaning, yeah, we all have a goal to become healthy, but the system is how we actually become healthy. That's what the 7 habits of health actually are. They are the system en route to get there. So when we adopt those 7 habits, which we talked about on last episode, and we'll get into a little bit in this episode as well, that is how we get there, if that makes sense.
Right. And I think the way that's been helpful to me in thinking about habits, it's kind of like this input that creates an output, right? It's kind of like you put in something that a system, kind of like what you said, that's going to give you the results that are perfectly designed to give. And so one big takeaway I personally had from your book, and to be honest with you, it's something that I started to put in my vocabulary just to impress my friends, like, because it's a really big word, it's a really big term, but it's this thing that you called the aggregation of marginal gains. And so can you just break that down for us? I know I've started to use it in everyday life just in the hopes that people will start to think I'm a little bit smarter. Can you just talk about that a little bit and how we can start applying that?
So I like to say that culture has an invisible undertow. And if we are not aware, it's going to take us in a direction that we don't want to go. And one of those things, part of that undertow, is the message culture will tell you that if you want to change, if you want a big result, you need to make a big change, right? It's where the term cutting cold turkey comes from. That if you want to lose 30 pounds, then you have to live in the gym. You can only eat chicken and rice or those green detox smoothies, and you can literally excommunicate yourself from any social gathering where there might be a tempting meal, because if we want to obtain our result of losing 30 pounds, then we need to make a big change. But if you are like me and have tried to cut cold turkey and have been frustrated because 2 or 3 weeks into that, you end up back at the starting line where you started because your old habits took back over, you're frustrated. But what if there was a better way? And the fancy term is the aggregation of marginal gains, but when you break that down, it simply means getting 1% better every day, not getting 50, 75, 100% better every single day, because that's unsustainable, which is why getting 1% better is such a better system, because it is sustainable. I can figure out how to get 1% better easier than getting 100% better, if that makes sense.
Right.
And if we look at it mathematically, if we're to get 1% better every single day for a year, you end up with 37 times better than where you were. It follows the exponential graph because our habits build on one another. But if you get 1% worse every single day over 365 days a year, you end up with virtually nothing. So habits really are a double-edged sword that hold the potential to do a lot of good and do a lot of bad. But when we look at the key word behind habits, it's that word sustainability. And cutting cold turkey or trying to make a big change is never going to get us there.
Right.
But if we can make those slow, sustainable results and they build on top of one another, that's a much better way to do that.
Right. And I just think it would be a really weird, like, big goal for somebody. You know, when no one, when they think about goals, is like, I just want to get 1% better. They're always like, I want to do it all at once. Like, I want to make this big goal and I want to accomplish it. And I think what I love about habits is it's less of a goal and it's more of a system.
Yes.
So it's less about like striving towards arriving at one point, but it's more about placing and establishing a system in your life to live by. And so there's a difference between setting a goal to accomplish and a system that we're putting in place to live by.
Yes.
Could you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, and I like some of the things that you were hinting at earlier too about this, because one of the lenses that I like to view about habits is they are the compounded interest of self-improvement. And I'll say it again. Habits are the compounded interest of self-improvement, that when we focus on our system getting 1% better every single day, they're going to build on top of one another.
Right.
But if it was as easy as just setting that goal, okay, I'm just going to get 1% better every single day, then how come everybody doesn't do it?
Yeah.
Right? And I like to ask myself this question when I'm talking about this. I'll pose the question, how come every team doesn't win the championship? Right? I mean, that's the goal, right? It's the difference between goal and a system. If the goal is to win a championship, how come so few do? Or if our goal is to lose 20 pounds in January for a New Year's resolution, how come only a few do and not everybody does? Because like you said, if the difference between from success and unsuccess isn't the goal we set, but the systems we establish, then there has to be a differentiating mark. And when it comes to winning a championship, our system would merely be how we manage practice, how we recruit new players, and how we manage assistant coaches. Right? It's not the what, but the how. Like, what are we actually doing? How are we actually going about that? And again, if we want to lose 10 pounds, it's how often we sleep, how clean we eat, how often we move, and how much we downregulate our stress. Those are our systems. And again, I know you brought up James Clear, which I think is kind of like the pioneer when it comes to the habits world right now.
Right.
If you have not checked out his book, Atomic Habits, it is so
We've been talking about it so much.
Yes. But he makes a quote, or he says a line that says, we don't rise to the level of our goals, but fall to the level of our systems. It's so true. We all have lofty goals that we want to write a book, start a business, run a marathon. But what are we actually doing to get there? That's the power behind habits. It's the how are we actually doing it? Well, what do your habits look like? So that's a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've noticed in my life, in talking about systems, is that systems are extremely difficult to put in place, right? And I think the reason behind that is because we often try to put in systems, but the source of that is through our willpower, while we're still finding ourselves in environments that are difficult to promote change in those systems. And so the problems oftentimes with change and why you could not be seeing the results of change in your life is because that it's sourced out of your willpower and not out of your environment.
That's good.
And I listened to another podcast recently that was talking about how what I've called, last week I kind of talked about the lie of compartmentalization, and this week I'd like to produce a new lie to you listeners, and it's the lie of willpower. That your willpower, and when you try to cultivate change just out of your own strength and out of willpower, that's often the cause of your system collapsing, is because it's sourced solely in just you striving the best you can to do something. And I think that's why systems are so hard to put in place, because when you try to create change through your willpower and not through the change in your environment, that's often where you see your systems fall. So in this podcast, they were talking about how humans are such adaptable creatures, right? Like all throughout history, we've been able to adapt to the most sincere and just the most like jaw-dropping scenarios and changes. And we're very adaptable. So what you have to do to create change in your environment is to push yourself to be adaptable. And I think there's something there, Alex. I think that if forcing ourselves to adapt, it looks more like, hey, if I know that I need to wake up early in the morning, what I'm going to do is set out my gym clothes so that if I, have this environment change where my TV's not in my room, I no longer am getting woken up by the alarm clock on my phone, then when I wake up, my clothes are already set out. You are largely more inclined to go to the gym and to do something that promotes your health, which, like we were talking about, is so integrated into health of your mental health, your emotional health, your relational health. So you going to the gym is important because it factors in so many other wells of health. And so I think environmental changes cause you to be adaptable, and willpower isn't always the thing that's going to allow your systems to set in place. So Alex, do you have any comments on just like environment, impact, and change, and why environmental change contributes so largely to health?
Gosh, Matt, this is so good. Everything you said was spot on because, gosh, if I could harp on one thing more, it would be this. It would be the impact of your environment, because I say that your environment is the invisible hand that shapes all human behavior.
Wow.
It's your environment is the invisible hand that shapes all human behavior, because good habits and bad habits don't break by themselves. Because if we're to listen to culture, again, if you've ever heard of the phrase, I think it's like a popular YouTube video. It says something like, "If you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe, then you'll be successful."
Yeah.
Right? That went viral. But listen to the undertone of that. It's saying your willpower must be greater, right? You got to want it more. But what happens when that initial motivation dwindles? Right? We're all human. We don't desire something at 100% capacity for our entire life. I mean, I've been following a specific workout routine for about 9 years now, but I'm not always on cloud 9 wanting to go to the gym every single day. So what happens when that initial motivation or willpower dwindles? Well, your environment is going to shape all human behavior. Your environment is primed to give you the current results that you're currently getting. Your environment holds the potential to make or break you. And this is the analogy I like to think about. Is if a little campfire, imagine a campfire. If your campfire represents your quest for self-improvement, getting better, implementing the 7 habits of health, whatever it is, imagine a campfire. The kindling you start that fire with is your desire, is your willpower, is that initial motivation, right? At first, it burns strong, it's bright, and it's burning bright initially on that excitement and passion. Yes, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. Yes, I'm going to write a book. Yes, I'm going to start a business. Yes, I'm going to X, Y, or Z, fill in the blank. But as everyone knows, you cannot sustain a fire with only kindling, right? If you're going to sustain a fire by only giving it kindling, it's only a matter of time before your kindling runs out. Because when you buy kindling, you only get a certain amount from a store,
right?
Because they know that's not what you sustain a fire with. But your environment is the vast forest behind your campfire, supplying enough wood to burn a lifetime.
That's so true.
That's your environment, because it holds the potential and the resources, and the environment that you're in, it holds the potential to give you what you need and shape your behavior for either good or bad habits. And for example, what is our environment? We're not talking about going living in trees or going to live in nature or the ocean, like not like that nature, but we're talking about when it comes to environment. Your environment is your kitchen pantry. It's your refrigerator setup. It's your workout group text. It's the water bottle sitting next to your computer, and it's your journal sitting right on your desk. It's your Google Chrome viewing history. It's your favorite online health bloggers and the favorite people you follow on Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook. It's the running shoes in your car trunk, the vegetables on your counter, everything that you surround yourself with. That is your environment. And we actually talk a lot about some of the things that culture has primed our environment with, which in habit number 3, moving often, I spend almost 20 pages talking about how our environment literally primes us to sit in every single location, what the ramifications of sitting are on our health now. So our environment really does shape all human behavior. But what would it look like is if one of my bad habits is watching too much TV, and I actually want to engage more meaningful conversations with my kids, how am I going to break the habit of watching TV and build better habits of engaging in meaningful conversations with my kids? Well, I'm going to prime my environment. I'm going to remove the TV from the living room and put it in the guest room so it's in a less frequent viewing place. Or I'm going to take the batteries out of the remote to increase friction to break that bad habit. Or I'm going to put sticky notes on my laptop or put a reminder on my phone to limit my screen time, engage with my kids, whatever that may be. But whatever environment that you surround yourself with, we need to prime, we need to move all the levers to take us in the direction that we want to go. For example, if we want to lose 10 pounds, then if your environment is primed with cookies and Pop-Tarts, you're going to eat them. I mean, I eat every single dessert in my house because I don't have the willpower to not to, right? Because A, life is more enjoyable than food, but B, my environment is priming me to eat those.
Right.
But how do truly healthy people not eat Pop-Tarts and Oreos? They don't buy them in the first place. They prime their environment to send them in the direction of eating clean, whole, real foods. Not to say that we can't, which we're going to talk about in the later habit of eating clean, where the 80-20 rule, but the environment really is, it holds like the capacity and potential to change everything. It really is the invisible hand that shapes all human behavior.
Alex, I totally agree with you. And I think we've talked a lot about how environment is greater than your willpower. But maybe what can we dive a little bit into, like, what is the problem with willpower? Like, why do you think that willpower isn't a sufficient source to create change?
I would simply say that the willpower isn't sufficient because it's not sustainable. If we go back to that campfire, that your willpower will eventually fade. Where some people have a higher capacity to do more longer, but at some point, your willpower or your margin of energy will dwindle at some point. But if we are looking at becoming truly healthy and not going back to the starting line of our old habits returning, then we need to find a much more sustainable route. And part of that entails priming our environment so we don't have to rely on our initial willpower or motivation to dwindle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's the key word there. It's sustainability. I think that a lot of us, there's a lot of answers to the question of, like, how do I get healthy, or how can I start the road to get healthy? But a lot of us don't talk about how to stay there, how to stay healthy, how to remain truly healthy. And I think actually this, like, in and out of health and unhealth and health and unhealth back and forth is actually creating this, like, just long journey and long history of just unhealth. It's actually less healthy of you to go in and out of health time and time again than to just realign some of your focus and your attention amongst health.
So do you mind if I say a research finding on that exact thing you just talked about?
Drop it.
So when you look at diet culture, so when it comes to our physical health, diet culture, it's underlining diet culture is this binge and restrict cycle,
right,
where if you're going to diet, you're going to restrict, and then once you're done with that diet, you're going to binge on what you have been binging on before you started the diet, right? It's that 21-day juice detox. You do the juice cleanse, you only drink those juices, then on day 22 you go back to normal eating, and you just kind of reverse the curse. You kind of go back in those cycles, binge restrict, binge restrict, binge restrict. But studies have shown that someone who goes through that binge restrict cycle in 1 year, 1 year after they started that cycle, they actually have gained weight instead of lost weight.
Wow.
The majority of people gained weight after a full year of the binge restrict cycle than actually losing weight, which is why it's so much harder on your body to send it in extreme ends of the spectrum of binge restrict, or
right,
going all in and not. Kind of like that willpower. Yes, I'm going to go to the gym for 2 months. I'm going to drop out for 3 months. Yes, I'm going to go for 2 weeks. Then I'm not going to do anything. But if we're to get 1% better every single day, prime our environment so that we can have this more of a sustainable, consistent lifestyle into the rhythms of our day to day, that's where we will see true change.
Right. And I also think that even just to talk about willpower a little bit psychologically, like, I was kind of breaking this down with a friend, and I think how willpower threw this curve for me was that I've seen some people accomplish some pretty incredible things just through brute willpower. But again, I think the key word here is sustainability. Are you able to sustain that for a long amount of time? And when you're not able to maintain what your willpower requires of you, are you still going to fall back on something that's truly healthy? And here's what I think, and I was breaking this down with a friend the other day, is I think that the problem with willpower, and you can hear it in exactly the quote that you just talked about, and it's so funny you brought that up, because I literally used to take that clip and I would plug it into the speakers in our locker room before football games, because it just used to fire me up. And he was like, I take his head and I'm holding him down. I'm holding him down.
Yes.
And I pull it out and said, when you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe, then you'll be successful. But you can even hear it in that is I think deep down, and Sigmund Freud did a lot of research on this thing called the ego and the superego, and you can even hear it.
The ego, the superego, yes.
Exactly, yeah. You remember that in the iceberg analogy?
Yep.
You remember that? Shout out to Glenn, Professor Glenn, my Psych 1101 professor, teaching me about all that. But in all this talk about the ego, I think you can even hear it in the talk on willpower, is that the misconception here, and I think what makes it such a lie, is that you have to create change based off of your ego. I think, and here's the thing about your ego, is that it protects itself at all costs. And the dangerous thing is sometimes you even do it subconsciously.
Wow.
And so I think sometimes you hear, I want to succeed as bad as I want to breathe. The drive there is to be successful.
Right.
And it's not to be healthy or to be sustainable or to invest in things that are meaningful or in purpose. It's in success. And I think the lie in that is that I want to be seen as successful.
Right.
I want to be a successful person that people look at as successful, that people look at as somebody who's accomplished something that matters, that means something. And ego, like I said, it protects itself at all costs. And so I think here, like, just kind of thinking about this psychologically, I think the two things that kind of tie down that I've been thinking through recently, because again, like I just said, some people accomplish some incredible things out of like just pure willpower. Like I've seen, like, for example, I don't know if any of you listening are familiar with David Goggins, but this man runs like hundreds of miles, but like posts these videos on YouTube like, I got up this morning at 4 a.m., ran 40 miles. And you're like, dude, what?
Like, I live a normal life. I can't do that.
You're like, that is not normal, you
Right.
know? But in deep down, I think that's exactly it.
Not to harp on David Goggins. He's awesome. I love him.
David Goggins, I love him. David Goggins, if you're listening to this.
If you're running to Buckhead, we will run with you.
I don't know about running with him. That man's crazy.
We'll try.
He's crazy. But I think you can even hear it sometimes. It's like this protection of like what really is going to be long-term for you and going to create that environmental change like we talked about. And so I think I arrived at these two things, is that willpower is a lie because it's protected by ego. And the problem with willpower being your source is, one, it creates this motivation that you need to prove something to somebody else.
Yep.
And maybe even the more dangerous one, number two, that you need to prove something to yourself.
Wow.
That you have to prove something like to you. So when you look in the mirror, like, I have to prove that I'm worthy, that I'm important, that I matter, like I'm successful, like we talked about.
Wow.
Or the other source, that I want to prove that I'm successful and I'm someone to, you know, be impressive and to be looked at as I've accomplished things so that others can see. And here's the thing, is I think both of those sides are just misinformation about your identity.
Yes.
And it's all this misinformation about who you are and how you view yourself. And it's like what we've talked about in the recent episode and even earlier in this one, is that doesn't contribute to true health. Is that when you're misinformed about yourself and who you are, that what it's going to create is something that's not sustainable. So the issue with your ego, like I've said 1,000 times, is that its desires to protect itself at all costs. And I think when you do that and you're working out of ego, that you're working out of this deficit, and so which is not sustainable again. And so I think seeing health and balance in your life, and this is something that's become a mantra in my life so heavily, but I think health, and I think you would agree with me, Alex, is so much more about addition than it is subtraction.
Yes.
Because living in a deficiency is not sustainable.
Yes.
It's not sustainable because I think what starts to happen is it causes you to hyper-focus on these wells of health. Like we've talked a lot about the differences in relational health, emotional health, mental health, physical health. And I think what working out of a deficiency does is it makes you put one into the light and give it all of your resources and attention, and then neglect being balanced in all areas. And so it knocks off, like we talked about in the last episode, this three-legged stool, or you have a house that you said you cleaned, but your room is still messy. And so I think it knocks off that balance. And I think, you know, even maybe, you know, you can touch on this a bit, that in your own experiences, I know for me, is that when you work in a deficiency, one thing, you know, for example, that could happen is you're like, oh man, I'm eating foods that are bad for me, and all of a sudden I'm a bad person, and my health has now become bad.
Right.
But the misconception there is that food has this some kind of like moral obligation. Like food is not a moral matter. Like you said in the last episode, it's amoral. Like
It lacks the capacity of morality.
right. And we look at food in that way where it's like, oh, this Pop-Tart is bad for me. And we attribute it to something moral. And then we start to think, man, I'm a bad person. So I think deficiency is poisonous because it's this type of thought that just allows you to live out in something that's not sustainable.
Do you mind if I chirp in on that?
Absolutely.
Because I could not major on that major anymore, because I love when it comes to identity, because in this conversation of habits, you are literally hitting the nail on the head. Because when it comes to habit formation or habit breaking, right, building better habits or breaking bad ones, it's hard. But a lot of the times it's difficult because we're trying to change the wrong thing. We're trying to change either outcomes or processes rather than trying to change not our identity, but becoming someone different.
Wow.
Because
that's good.
My admonition would be to focus not on what you want to achieve, but on who you want to become.
Right.
Because true behavior change is identity change.
Right.
It's not the fact I wrote 10 pages. It's I am a writer.
Wow.
I didn't bake a cake. I am a baker. And when you live out of that identity, now your behavior flows from your identity. And how do you reinforce your identity? Through your behavior. It's a positive feedback loop. When you do something, it feeds your identity, and your identity fuels your behavior. So they keep going. So the old approach says, how can I lose 15 pounds? But the new approach says, what would a healthy person do? Tying it to your identity, anchoring it on who you want to become, or who is the type of person that can lose 15 pounds, not on doing, not on the process, not on the actual what, but on the who, on the identity. It also says, if you tell yourself, I'm not a morning person, you're enforcing that identity. The deeper a thought or action is tied to your identity, the harder it is to change that thought or action. So we need to be mindful on the thoughts or the things we're telling ourselves, because we're constantly casting votes for the type of person, the identity we're building, because true behavior change is identity change. When I say, no, I don't go to the gym, but I am a healthy person, that now is reinforcing you in the direction you want to go. And when it comes to identity as well, there are 3 lies that cultural undertow will always tell you. They are A, you are what you do. B, you are what you have. And C, they are what others say about you.
That's so good.
I'll say it again. 3 cultural lies when it comes to identity. I am what I do. I am what I have, and I am what others say about me. But when it comes to building a foundation of health, when you have a foundation of something, you are grounded. You are anchored. You are tethered to something that despite the undertow, that despite the storm, you are firmly planted. When you have the foundation of the 7 habits of health, you no longer have to blow in the cultural wind, but you know who you are, because you are now a healthy person. You are a better father. You are a better employee, whatever that is. Your identity isn't on what you do have or others say about you. You know who you are by uncovering what the 7 habits of health do for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And man, if you're listening, you need to pull out a notepad and a pen and start writing this down, because this stuff is good. It's super helpful. And man, I'm even getting impacted about it a lot right now. And so in the process of habits and breaking some of the bad ones, establishing new ones, Alex, you have 4 laws that you kind of hit on to both build and break habits. So can you just kind of present those 4 laws and then kind of give us an instance how we can apply them in our lives?
Sure. So first off, I cannot take credit for this. I gained all of what I learned about habits from the experts. And specifically, since we're on the James Clear train, I mean, I give all credit to him. But when it comes to what I like to call habitology or habits 101, like building better habits, how do we actually do that? We talk about environment, willpower, identity change, but let's get down to the practical pithy points, okay? Number 1, or let's go through all 4 of them, then we'll break them down. We need to make it obvious, easy, attractive, and satisfying. Those are the 4 ways you build a better habit. So for example, you want to start going to the gym. That is a habit you want to build. You want to start praying more. That's the habit you want to build. You need to ask yourself these questions. How can I make it obvious, easy, attractive, and satisfying? So let's break those down, and then we'll talk about the inverses of those. For example, how do we make it obvious? This is simply a visual cue. So if you want to go to the gym, I would advise you to simply put your workout clothes outside of in your bedroom, so in your view, so that when you wake up, that's the first thing you see. So you don't have to increase the friction by going to get your gym clothes. They're already out. You're making it obvious by giving a visual cue. How do we make it easy? When it comes to your shoes, let's put them at the front door instead of the back door. When it comes to the ease of building a better habit, it all comes down to increasing or decreasing the friction it takes to engage in that behavior. So ask yourself, how can I make this easy, but how can I reduce the friction it takes to do this? When it comes to making it attractive, we're talking about here, if we're talking about, okay, let's say we don't actually enjoy going to the gym, but we know it's something we should do, or just going on a 30-minute walk, movement in general. Sometimes it's not the act itself that brings the attractive quality, but it's the anticipation of the reward that it brings you. You see, it's a dopamine releaser that when we anticipate this is what it's going to do for us, now then it's going to release even more dopamine, which is the center of feelings of pleasure and satisfaction and all those stuff. So if you don't have a desire to go to the gym, I would bundle it with an attractive reward to motivate that consistent behavior, such as maybe if you work out consistently for 3 weeks, then you get to buy a new pair of shoes. Right? That makes it attractive. Yeah. And the last one is satisfying. If you know anything about Snapchat, you know about the Snapchat streaks, like going like 100 days.
People love their streaks.
You can't break the streak, right? It's the satisfaction of progress that keeps people engaging in a consistent behavior. True. So if you are engaging in, okay, I'm going to mark a red X in my calendar every single time I go to the gym or eat clean or engage in a meaningful conversation with my family. Track your progress through a habit tracker, through a calendar, on your phone, whatever that is. But when you visually see your progress, you're more apt to engage in that consistent behavior. So ask yourself, how can I make this obvious, easy, attractive, and satisfying? Those are the 4 when it comes to building better habits.
Man, I love that. And I think just as we come to a close today, I would just love for everybody who's listening maybe to take some of that information and just think about, how can you sit and ponder what you want to see in your life today? We talked a lot about environmental change, adaptation, identity, and a lot of these things that contribute to being truly healthy. And where do you see a lack of that in your own life? And maybe just dream for a moment. What do you want to see in your own life? And rather than just sitting and dreaming in that, narrow the focus of these goals and just begin to brainstorm small environmental changes in order to start moving towards that thing that Alex talked about, that aggregation of marginal gains, that 1% towards creating change so that you can be more truly healthy. So what changes do you need to make to not just in your actions, but in your environment in order to move towards your goals? What small habits can you establish in your life today? And whether that be laying out your clothes the night before in early morning, or removing your TV from your room, maybe charging your phone outside of your room, ask yourself today what your life could be if you could today, in this moment, decide to establish systems to begin moving forward towards true health. So, hey guys, we're going to continue this conversation on being truly healthy. We've still got so much more to come. Today was super helpful for me, Alex. It was so helpful for me. I learned a lot today just listening to you break some stuff down. So you guys, thanks for tuning in with us, and we look forward to seeing you guys next episode.